I knew something was off the moment our CTO, Rick, tripped over himself in the hallway trying to impress the new director of operations. Man's got 3 patents and a PhD, but there he was, nervously pointing at fire exit signage like it was a goddamn Picasso. That's how Blake arrived, on a red carpet of brown nosing and nervous laughter. And me? I was the invisible one holding the actual foundation together. You know, minor things, like the documents that kept our insurance valid, the compliance systems that stopped our investors from suing us, and the audit protocols no one ever read unless the building was metaphorically on fire. I'm Carol. Risk and compliance. I don't do flair. I don't do stand-ups, I don't circle back, and if someone tries to give me a cupcake on my birthday, I file a quiet HR flag for attempted manipulation. But I do know where every risk assessment lives, who's overdue on their mandatory certs, and how to read the fine print on policies that could bankrupt this company in less time than it takes Kyle from sales to forget his own password again. Been here 7 years. Outlasted 3 CTOs, 2 CEOs, and 1 power-drunk VP who once suggested we skip quarterly reviews to foster agility. That man now works in Arizona selling kombucha. They called me the compliance lady. Never Carol, never boss. Just the woman with the scary clipboard who ruined launch parties by asking where the updated vendor indemnity forms were. Legal loved me. Ops ignored me, which was fine by me until they hired Blake. Now, before we dive into the glorious downfall of this suit and smirk disaster, let me ask you a small favor. If you're into stories where the quiet ones torch the whole circus with a paperclip and a protocol clause, hit that little subscribe button and maybe throw a like this way. It tells the team behind this story that you want more unhinged office justice, and honestly, it's the kind of encouragement that makes spreadsheets feel romantic again. Anyway, when the memo went out that we were welcoming a new director of operations with a fresh vision, I was in the middle of updating our vendor recertification files for the annual insurance review. Exciting, I know. Nothing says Friday night like chasing down a fourth-tier subcontractor's SOC2 report while eating peanut butter crackers in a windowless office. I didn't care about vision. I cared about the fact that our liability renewal was due in 27 days, and one wrong checkbox could turn our whole year into a lawsuit piñata. Lake arrived Monday morning with the kind of swagger you usually only see on guys who think LinkedIn is a dating app. He wore cologne that made the copier smell like a Hollister store and introduced himself by clapping. I'm not kidding. Full-on clap. All right, team, let's disrupt some silos. He barked before mispronouncing half the department names and referring to finance as the wallet goblins. I remember watching from my corner of the conference table, sipping lukewarm coffee and thinking, he's going to break something expensive. It took him 2 days to rename our department Strategic Risk Synergies. It took him 3 to schedule a transparency town hall, where he used a 5-slide PowerPoint to explain that compliance is more of a vibe than a rule. By day 5, he'd started pushing some new vendor through for approval, a consulting firm run by, you guessed it, his old roommate from undergrad. Guy named Tyler. No credentials, no risk experience. Just a LinkedIn profile with words like Visioneer and Scalability Ninja. Tyler's big pitch, that he could automate our entire compliance process with just a few macros and a sprinkle of disruption. I asked him one question: what's your plan for handling ISO 27001 alignment across third-party integrations? He blinked like I'd asked him how to translate Morse code using hamsters, and he called me intense. That's when Blake started calling me out in meetings. Carol, can we not doomcast every change we make? Or let's not get bogged down in bureaucracy. He even implied at one point that my tone was hostile to innovation. Imagine that. The woman making sure our server logs don't turn into subpoenas is hostile, because I wouldn't let his friend replace certified audit trails with Google Sheets and Vibes. Still, I kept my head down, focused on the audit, kept legal in the loop, checked every box, filed every form. I'd seen blowhards come and go. They all hit the same wall eventually. The quiet infrastructure people they ignored are the ones who hold the keys. And mine were the kind you don't see until they're already gone. Blake didn't walk, he announced. Every hallway became his catwalk. You'd hear him before you saw him, always laughing too loud at his own jokes. The kind of laughter that sounded like a podcast no one asked to listen to. He kept saying things like, "This isn't your grandma's ops team," which, ironically, made me miss my grandmother and her obsessive coupon filing system. At least she understood the value of documentation. By the second week, he'd already taken 3 meetings without inviting risk and compliance. I found out about them when legal looped me in afterward asking if Blake had cleared the new vendor contracts he'd promised. Spoiler, he hadn't. He didn't even know we had a pre-vetting checklist for external partners. He told legal to chill and that Carol would rubber stamp it later. He said my name like I was the office intern who brought him Diet Coke with too much attitude. In our weekly all-hands, Lake stood up and waved around a printed proposal with so many buzzwords I thought it was AI-generated. We're onboarding Tyler's firm, Strat Nova Group, their next-gen, full-stack and bleeding edge. They're going to revolutionize our compliance approach. The document had the word synergize on it 7 times, once as a verb and once as a noun. I checked. I raised my hand. Blake, has Strat Nova filled out our third-party attestation forms? You need their ISO and SOC2 compliance verified before onboarding. Also, the insurance renewal requires that we disclose any new consultants touching compliance operations. He waved me off like I'd asked him to solve quantum physics. Carol, don't worry. Tyler's not some pencil pusher. He's a disruptor. And honestly, your level of concern feels a little intense for what should be a seamless integration. We're building momentum here. Let's not kill it with paranoia. Paranoia. That word rang in my ears all the way back to my desk. Paranoia was what people called due diligence when they were too lazy or too arrogant to follow rules. A day later, I found Tyler sitting at the desk outside Blake's office. He'd brought his dog, his actual dog. It was wearing a hoodie that said Compliance Pup. It was bragging to our admin about how he once streamlined a client's entire vendor audit process by just declaring trust as a value. Meanwhile, I had 6 emails from our insurer's liaison asking for the updated risk control matrix and proof of procedural segregation for the coming policy renewal, which, by the way, was in 19 days. I went to Blake directly. Look, I said, your guy doesn't have credentials, doesn't have a security review on file, and we haven't disclosed him to our insurer. If we move forward without that, our coverage could get flagged. We're in violation of our own vendor policy. Blake leaned back in his ergonomic throne like a man who thought chairs were for the weak. Carol, this company has survived before you, and it'll survive after. I'm here to speed things up, not drown in bureaucracy. Tyler's going to clean up this mess. This mess is what's keeping your board from being personally liable if someone sues us, I said. If you're going to override protocol, put it in writing. He didn't like that. I saw it in his eyes like I'd just told him he needed permission to breathe. That afternoon, I got a meeting invite. HR. 2 reps I barely knew, reading from a script. They said there had been concerns raised about my resistance to change and my communication tone. I asked for specific examples. They said they weren't at liberty to share. I asked if the company had documented any procedural reassignment of my role. They blinked like I'd spoken Latin. You're not being let go, they said, like that was a kindness. We're just creating space for new strategy. You'll still support Tyler's transition and provide documentation on your current processes. Support his transition. Like I was a pit stop before he drove off in my car. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just stood up and walked out. Back at my desk, I opened the compliance portal, verified my name was still listed as named assessor on our active liability policies, and printed the protocol document for notifying our insurer in the event of material change. Then I printed a single-page letter, signed it, and sealed it in an envelope. That letter would reach someone far more powerful than HR, someone who doesn't clap in meetings. I got the call at 8:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, which is statistically the worst time to fire someone. No coffee yet, inbox full, printer jammed. Blake's voice came through my headset, too cheerful, like someone pretending not to enjoy it. Hey, Carol, can you pop into Conference B? Quick chat, quick chat. That phrase should come with a legal warning. I already knew what was coming. You don't call in HR for a chat unless there's blood on the carpet. Conference B smelled like new carpet and fake empathy. HR was already there, 2 reps this time, sitting across from me like twins rehearsing a breakup speech. Blake was leaning against the wall, arms folded, eyes lit up with that fake managerial sorrow you see right before someone tweets about tough but necessary decisions. Carol, he started, this isn't easy. We've decided to go in a different direction. Different direction, another classic. I could have made bingo cards out of these phrases. You're great at what you do, but the culture is shifting toward agility and collaboration, and well, sometimes legacy processes don't align with that. I looked at him. You mean I follow the law? He laughed like that was adorable. Let's not make this adversarial. You've been here a long time, and we appreciate that. But I think we both know you've been resistant to new energy. You've created friction. HR jumped in immediately, voices overlapping. We'll make sure your transition is smooth. No need for hard feelings. You'll receive a separation packet within cultural misalignment, Blake interrupted, smiling like he'd just invented the phrase. That's the official reason. I didn't fight it, not one word. I just sat there for a long moment, watching them try to look sympathetic while Tyler's voice carried faintly through the glass wall outside. He was already there, laughing, in my chair, my desk. It was all so efficient it almost felt rehearsed. They didn't ask for my badge, I handed it over before they could. Didn't ask for my laptop password, I'd already wiped every personal file. The only thing I didn't erase was the audit trail, because every move I made was logged, timestamped, archived. Permanently. HR stood up first, relieved it was over. We'll escort you out, just standard procedure. I know the procedure, I said, standing calmly. I wrote it. I walked past Tyler on my way to the elevator. He didn't even look up from my keyboard. Just mumbled something to Blake about getting things streamlined. I looked at his monitor and almost laughed. He had my risk dashboard open, staring at the insurer's portal like it was the Da Vinci Code. The elevator doors closed before I let myself feel anything. Anger wanted to claw its way out, but I didn't let it. Rage makes noise. Revenge, done right, doesn't. Back home, I set the company laptop on the counter and pulled the letter from my bag. One envelope, cream-colored, thick paper, because serious letters should have weight. It was addressed to the underwriter at the insurance firm, the one I'd spoken with for years, the one who'd once told me, "You're the only reason your company's paperwork makes sense." Inside, one sentence, effective immediately, I am no longer employed by the policyholder and therefore can no longer serve as named assessor under the coverage terms. It wasn't spite, it was protocol. A protocol Blake hadn't bothered to read. That's the thing about paperwork, it doesn't care about charisma. It only cares about precision. I sealed it, wrote the date, and walked it to the mailbox myself. The sound it made hitting the bottom, soft, final, almost anticlimactic. Then I went home, made black coffee, and watched the rain streak down the window. Somewhere across town, my name was still on every risk filing, every certification, every audit submission. By the time they realized what that meant, it would already be too late. The first signal came 2 days after I mailed the letter. Not a bang, a whimper. 6:48 a.m. email from our internal audit coordinator, subject line, "Carol, did you move the 2023 vendor research docs?" I stared at the screen, sipping my coffee. The answer, of course, was no. I didn't move them. Tyler just didn't know where they were, or how to read the indexing table, or that there was an indexing table. Over the next week, the little cracks spread like hairline fractures across a windshield. Quiet things. Quarterly risk summary went out with 3 sections blank. Legal asked for preclearance matrix and got a Google Doc with 2 bullet points and the phrase "to be determined." Someone tried to generate a compliance report and called me, post-firing, because the new dashboard Tyler launched had accidentally filtered out all third-party vendors. That includes the ones flagged for high security risk. I didn't return the call. I sat on my porch in the afternoon sun, watching a squirrel fight a plastic bag, and thought, it's begun. My old inbox, still connected to my phone for now, started filling up with auto-forwarded risk alerts. Vendor credentials expiring, unacknowledged policy updates, missed review deadlines. The system was built to notify me when things went wrong. And now that no one was tending the garden, the weeds were screaming. By the end of the week, HR reached out. The email was politely worded, something about ensuring a seamless transition and supporting operational continuity. They wanted me to provide documentation. Not access, they already had that. Understanding. The kind of understanding that can't be Googled or taught in a PowerPoint. I didn't respond right away. I let them stew for 3 days. When I finally replied, it was 3 lines. Per my termination, I am no longer authorized to access internal systems. Any documentation required should already exist per audit guidelines. Best of luck. The silence afterward was delicious. My neighbor Linda asked me why I seemed so chipper lately. I said I was just getting more sleep. She assumed it was a new mattress. I didn't tell her it was watching the slow-motion car wreck from my recliner with a cup of peppermint tea and the self-satisfaction of a woman who warned everyone the brakes were shot. I wasn't gloating, not really. Gloating implies surprise. I knew this would happen. Tyler had no idea what he'd stepped into. Compliance isn't just rules, it's layers. Interdependencies, insurance frameworks tied to contractual guarantees, all built on timelines that stretch back years. You don't just slap your name on a dashboard and hope it holds. It's like taking the controls of a 747 mid-flight and announcing, "Don't worry, I saw a YouTube tutorial." More emails came. Audit flagged missing confirmations on 3 high-risk vendors. Legal sent a CC-heavy message wondering why the latest SOC2 reports hadn't been filed. IT flagged an expired multi-factor authentication agreement that Tyler didn't even know existed. The kicker? An automated insurance system alert, CC'd to the CFO, stating that the upcoming renewal review was still missing the official named assessor certification, a role, as it stood, that no longer legally existed in their structure. And still, they hadn't called me. Pride, or maybe denial, probably both. I imagine Blake pacing his office, trying to spin it as a rough adjustment period. Tyler fumbling through the shared drive like it was a treasure map drawn in invisible ink. HR silently regretting their role in all this, but too afraid to admit they'd helped create the collapse. That's the part no one talks about in these situations, the invisible weight people like me carry. Because when we go, it's not just the files, it's the connective tissue, the historical memory, the context behind every checkbox, the why behind every no, and once that's gone, all that's left is a very expensive, very public unraveling. I poured another cup of coffee and opened a crossword. Down 5 letters, action taken in revenge. Smiled, sabotage, wrong, protocol, perfect. Lake strutted into the quarterly board meeting like he'd just cured cancer with a motivational poster. I heard from someone in finance that he high-fived Tyler outside the glass conference room beforehand. Tyler, for his part, was holding a reusable water bottle labeled Chief Disruptor. I don't know what's worse, that he brought it or that someone probably gifted it to him. The room was full. CEO, CFO, a few board members in from Chicago, even our primary VC rep dialing in from the West Coast. They were all there to hear Blake's big state of risk and compliance update, his first one since taking over my systems. He opened with a click of his slide remote and a grin that could have melted wax. I'm proud to share that under new leadership, we've modernized our compliance operations, streamlined redundant checkpoints, and adopted a more agile, forward-thinking model for risk. Forward thinking. Translation, we stopped checking things because it made us feel bad. The slides were beautiful. Tyler must have spent hours picking the stock photos. Happy people in headsets, a lock icon made of puzzle pieces, a chart with no labels but a very aggressive upward arrow. We've reduced audit friction by 38%, improved onboarding velocity, and eliminated several unnecessary control loops. Blake clicked to a slide with a giant green check mark and the words insurer aligned. That one made me laugh, because I knew what they didn't, that my name, Carol Denise Langford, was still listed on the underlying certification filings that their renewal depended on. The filings that Tyler never reviewed, never updated, never even noticed. Because to him, paperwork was background noise. To Blake, it was an obstacle to self-congratulation. The insurer hadn't called yet. They would, it was only a matter of time. These things don't snap, they erode. Still, the board ate it up. One even said, I like this guy's energy. Another asked if we could share Blake's risk dashboard as a model for portfolio companies. Then came the killer moment. One board member, a quiet older man who'd been scribbling on a legal pad the whole time, finally looked up and asked, and you've cleared this through your assessor of record, correct? Blake didn't blink. Absolutely. Been aligned on all fronts, couldn't ask for a smoother transition. I could practically feel the universe hold its breath, because Blake had no idea that I was still the official assessor, that under our liability policy, no material changes could occur without my sign-off, that every single adjustment Tyler made had technically been invalid since day one. But I said nothing. I didn't call. I didn't email. I didn't warn anyone, because this wasn't my company anymore. This was Blake's kingdom now, and every king is entitled to his false sense of security before the storm. After the meeting, word spread that the board had greenlit the next funding round. A modest injection, enough to push the product expansion Blake had been hyping. There were whispers of bonuses. Blake was already measuring his next title. I got the update from an old colleague who still felt bad about how things went down. Texted, looks like they think everything's under control. You okay? I replied with a thumbs-up emoji and went back to reading the insurance carrier's policy fine print. Clause 6C, any misrepresentation of coverage status during active funding negotiations constitutes a material breach of policy. In other words, if you lie about your compliance state during a funding round, your insurance doesn't just lapse, it detonates. But sure, Blake, everything's aligned. I didn't even know he was coming. The invite wasn't on the calendar. No email alert, no preamble. Just there he was. Jonah Whitaker, senior counsel for Fidelity Indemnity Group, sitting at the end of the boardroom table with a leather folder and the quiet confidence of a man who knows he's about to ruin someone's morning using nothing but bullet points and polite silence. I wasn't in the building, obviously. But the moment it happened, I got 3 texts and a screenshot within 15 minutes. People talk, especially the ones who were too afraid to say anything when I got canned, but now smell smoke and want to pretend they always had a bucket ready. Carol, he's here, the Jonah, what did you do? Nothing. I did nothing. I followed protocol, mailed a letter, watched the ripples spread. And now those ripples were crashing into the polished glass walls of conference room A, where Blake, smiling smug, utterly unaware, was about to take a barbed wire swan dive into the consequences. According to what I was told, Jonah waited until Blake had gone through his usual parade of jargon, complete with another pitch for compliance as a mindset. He even joked that they were thinking of rebranding risk and compliance as the trust division. Someone actually chuckled. And then Jonah, still silent, clicked his pen once. Before we continue, he said, I'd like to clarify a few items regarding your current policy renewal status. Blake straightened, smiled like this was part of the show. Of course, happy to walk you through it. Jonah didn't smile back. Who authorized the termination of the named assessor? Blake blinked. Excuse me? The named assessor, Jonah repeated, voice flat as concrete. The individual listed on your risk certification documents as required by Clause 11B of the active coverage policy. Pause, a shuffle of papers. Then Blake casually, oh, that was me, Carol Langford, she was reassigned. Jonah closed the folder. There was a very long silence after that. I'm told it lasted 15 full seconds. That's not a pause, that's a funeral. Then Jonah said, so you personally initiated the termination of the individual whose designation requires pre-notice and insurer authorization? Blake tried to smile again, but it came out wrong, tight, twitchy. I wasn't aware that, that's clear, Jonah said, interrupting for the first time. I'm here today because your renewal review triggered an anomaly. Carol Langford's status was flagged as inactive, yet no formal reassignment or policy notification had been submitted. Our system auto-escalated. The CEO leaned in. Is this going to affect coverage? Jonah turned to him slowly. Until the named assessor is formally replaced per the terms of the policy and approved by our office, your coverage is suspended, retroactively from the date of her termination, which, as I understand, was approximately 3 weeks ago. Tyler, bless his heart, actually whispered, "Wait, what does retroactively mean?" Someone in legal dropped a pen. And somewhere across town, I was sitting in a cafe, sipping an oat milk latte, reading a mystery novel I already knew the ending to. I didn't need to be in the room to feel the shift. Rippled outward like a power outage, every light flickering under the weight of someone finally flipping the right switch. The texts kept coming. Blake looks pale. CEO asked for a 5-minute recess, no one moved. Jonah brought a copy of the clause, he highlighted it. I didn't respond, just bookmarked my page and looked out the window at a tree shaking loose its dead leaves. Let them rattle, let them fall. Winter was coming early this year. Jonah didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. All he did was reach into his leather folder, pull out one sheet of paper, single-sided, no drama, and slide it across the glossy conference table to the CEO. The sound it made was soft, but in that dead-silent room it might as well have been a gunshot. "This is the clause in question," he said. "Standard in all our enterprise tier coverage policies. Clause 11B, paragraph 4, subsection C." He tapped the section once with the cap of his pen. "It outlines the procedure required to alter the status of a named assessor under an active policy." The CEO, a man I'd once watched fire an entire regional sales team without blinking, picked up the paper with fingers that trembled. He adjusted his glasses twice before reading out loud, voice thinner than usual. "No changes to the named assessor shall be considered valid without 30 days prior written notice submitted to the underwriter and acknowledged by the insurer. Termination of said assessor without this notice renders any and all certifications, risk summaries, or contractual compliance documents submitted during the void period invalid and non-binding." The paper dropped back to the table like it weighed 10 pounds. You could have heard a mouse die. Jonah folded his hands. Miss Langford was terminated without notice. No replacement was named. No notification was sent. That voids all certifications signed under her authority during the lapse window. Blake's voice cracked as he tried to defend himself. "But he's been overseeing the compliance dashboard. He's been submitting reports." Jonah didn't flinch. "He is not credentialed. He is not named. He is not recognized by our policy. Therefore, any materials submitted under his signature carry no legal weight." Legal weight. That phrase landed like a bowling ball in the center of the room. The CFO paled. One board member leaned back so hard her chair creaked. Another picked up his phone, thumb hovering like he was about to send a very expensive text. And Tyler? Poor, clueless Tyler. He muttered something about standardizing nomenclature, and was promptly ignored by every living thing in the room, including the ficus in the corner. Then Jonah continued, calmly as ever. "Furthermore, the guarantees you issued to prospective investors, based on your stated risk posture, are now out of compliance. This includes contractual language around data handling, third-party vetting, and regulatory audit alignment." Translation: every agreement Blake had championed, every flashy pitch deck Tyler had slapped together with his Canva graphics and misused acronyms, was now legally worthless. The contracts they'd crowed about in the last board update, unsanctioned. The risk scores they'd waved like flags, unverified. Everything they thought they'd secured was suddenly smoke. The CEO pushed back from the table, blinking hard. "So what are we looking at, a fine, a delay?" Jonah shook his head. "You're looking at a coverage freeze. Immediate. Your renewal is paused. Your liability coverage paused. Any new agreements signed under the assumption of valid risk oversight, null." Silence, long, breathless silence. Then finally the CEO turned to Blake. His voice barely held together. "You told us the insurer was aligned." Blake opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For once, there were no buzzwords, no strategic pivots or value-forward realignments. Just the hollow realization that he'd built his entire little empire on a single faulty assumption. That the paper trail didn't matter if you smiled enough. Jonah clicked his pen closed. "Fidelity Indemnity is willing to work with you to rectify the breach. But that process cannot begin until the named assessor is reinstated or replaced, properly, legally, and with insurer oversight." He stood up. "I'll be expecting a call, sooner rather than later." And with that, he left. No folder, no handshake. Just a door clicking shut behind him like the end of a sentence no one wanted to read. Back at my apartment, I watered my plants and checked the mail. No texts this time, no emails, just the quiet buzz of a building too stunned to admit it was on fire. And in the middle of that fire sat one crisp sheet of paper, quietly doing its job better than Blake ever could. My job, still echoing without me. The first call came in just after 7 a.m. I let it ring. No voicemail. Just the number of a corporate cell I used to see clipped to the CEO's belt like a badge of power. He was never a morning guy. If he was calling me before breakfast, it meant they'd stop pretending they had options. I poured my coffee, took my time. An hour later, my inbox chimed. Subject: reinstatement opportunity. It wasn't even from the CEO, it was legal, clearly trying to get ahead of the panic spiral. The email was polished, full of slippery little phrases like collaborative reconciliation and exploring mutual solutions. Then came the pitch, an offer to reinstate me under my prior title with enhanced autonomy and reporting flexibility. A 10% pay bump, retroactive back to the date of termination. Stock options, too. I stared at the blinking cursor in the reply box for a while. Then I wrote back, per Clause 11C of our active coverage policy, reinstatement of the named assessor following unauthorized termination requires written preclearance from said assessor, including updated oversight terms and formal insurer notification. I will require a revised contract. Please direct further communication to my counsel. Send. Less than 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. Same number. I didn't answer this one either. I didn't need to, because while they were scrambling to reverse engineer a fix, I already knew the insurer had frozen all pending renewals. Jonah didn't waste time. His firm's system flagged every contract touched in the last 30 days for noncompliance review. That included 2 new client pilots, a government subcontract, and one NDA-heavy deal with a biotech firm whose legal department files breach notices like grocery lists. What they hadn't realized, and what I never advertised, was that every time I certified a risk posture, I also documented the context. Timestamps, software versions, policy versions, vendor statuses, not just the what but the when. That's what made my files bulletproof. Tyler didn't even know such context tracking existed. The board held an emergency session that afternoon. I didn't attend, obviously, but the chat logs started circulating almost immediately. A friend in finance said Blake was visibly unraveling. The CEO looked 20 pounds lighter and 10 years older. No one dared use the word lawsuit out loud, but you could feel it hanging there, just off camera, like a loaded gun on the boardroom table. And somewhere in that spiral, they finally admitted what none of them had said since I left. They needed me. Not just my name, not just my files, me. Because without my signature, their risk posture was a house with no foundation. Every insurance clause they leaned on required not just oversight, but continuous oversight. And now that oversight had walked out the door with one letter and no intention of returning without terms, they tried again at 5:47 p.m. This time, a calendar invite from the CEO himself. Let's talk. I didn't decline. I didn't accept. I just let it sit. Power isn't always loud. Doesn't need to shout or slam doors. Sometimes it's quiet, silent even. A line in a contract, a name on a form, the absence of that name when it matters most. I had become the ghost in their system, the missing piece no one could forge or fake. Every document Tyler touched now carried a stain. Every assurance Blake gave was suddenly a gamble. And me? I was sitting in my lawyer's office, sipping tea, reviewing a draft of the new contract, one I had written, one that included things like indemnity clauses, consulting autonomy, and a non-revocable authority over all future assessor assignments. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in their collapse, only in the clarity of knowing I was no longer disposable. They could offer titles. I now demanded terms. The room went still the moment I stepped in. Not like the silence they give a CEO. That brand of silence is performative, eager, rehearsed. This was different. This was tight-lipped, fragile, like the walls themselves were bracing for what I might say or not say. I didn't wear a blazer, didn't carry a company badge. I walked in wearing a charcoal gray sweater, no logo, no pretense. In my arms was a black binder thicker than a tax audit and twice as unforgiving. It wasn't labeled. That was intentional. Jonah was already seated at the table, flipping through a legal pad. He looked up, gave me the slightest nod. Miss Langford said, crisp and precise, as though he'd been waiting for this exact minute since the moment Blake opened his smug mouth 2 weeks ago. The board sat frozen. The CEO's chair creaked as he leaned forward, tired, hollowed out by the weight of someone else's hubris. And Blake, gone, not fired, not officially, but absent. The kind of absence that smells like severance paperwork and deleted Slack accounts. No one spoke as I took my seat at the far end of the table, facing them all, calm as a winter lake. No nerves, just calculation. Just the math of consequences catching up to their origin. Jonah cleared his throat and addressed the room. Per Clause 11b, Section 4c, and with acknowledgement from the underwriter, the presence of the certified named assessor of record, reinstated under independent consulting status, satisfies the conditions necessary to restore liability coverage effective immediately. Translation: the bleeding stops when I say it stops. I opened the binder and slid it across the table toward the CEO. This is the updated risk framework. Version 7.0 includes vendor recertification protocol, third-party controls, and a new mandatory escalation path for policy violations. He stared at it like it might detonate. It's thicker, he said, half joking, half afraid. It's meaner, I replied. Jonah smirked. Board member flipped to the first page, where my name was printed in bold, legal font, Carol D. Langford named assessor of record, independent consultant, Langford Risk Advisory LLC. The LLC was new. The authority was not. The CEO leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. You saved us. I met his eyes, calm, unreadable. No, I said. I just didn't let you burn it down. No one clapped, no one cheered, they just sat there, marinating in the knowledge that the person they'd dismissed like an outdated software license had quietly become the operating system. I didn't need applause, I didn't need revenge. The silence in that boardroom was revenge, because they all knew I didn't scream, I didn't threaten, I mailed one letter. And everything fell exactly on schedule. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.